The highway stretched endlessly into the night, a dark ribbon cutting through the quiet outskirts of the city. Streetlights flickered at intervals, casting long shadows over the near-empty road. Olivia Carter gripped the steering wheel of her black sedan, her mind still occupied with the classified briefing she had just left. Being the newly appointed director of the FBI meant long nights and even longer responsibilities. She had spent years navigating the complexities of law enforcement, working alongside officers at every level. She understood the system, how it functioned, how it failed, and most importantly, how to survive within it. That was why, when red and blue lights suddenly flared in her rearview mirror, something about it felt wrong. Her foot eased off the gas. Instinctively, she glanced at the speedometer. Exactly 65. Not a mile over. She wasn't swerving, hadn't run a light, hadn't done anything to warrant being pulled over, but the patrol car behind her wasn't backing off. Olivia exhaled through her nose, keeping her movements deliberate as she signaled and guided her car onto the shoulder. Years of experience told her there was nothing to worry about. She had been on the other side of these stops countless times. She knew how this worked. And yet, the officer didn't approach right away. Instead, the patrol car idled behind her for too long. A minute, then another. The air inside her vehicle grew heavier with each passing second. Olivia adjusted her rearview mirror, trying to get a glimpse of him. The driver's side door of the cruiser finally swung open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with a stiffness that wasn't just professional, it was deliberate. His left hand rested on his duty belt, fingers just close enough to his holster to be concerning. The flashlight in his right hand bobbed slightly as he walked toward her window, the beam cutting through the darkness. Olivia kept both hands visible on the wheel as she lowered the window. "Evening, officer," she said, keeping her voice calm, professional. The flashlight's beam lingered on her face for too long, tracing her features like an interrogation spotlight. The officer chewed his gum slowly, his jaw working as he studied her. "License and registration." No greeting, no explanation, just a command. Olivia felt the first stirrings of unease coil in her stomach. "May I ask why I am being pulled over?" she asked evenly. The officer didn't answer immediately. He just stared, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he repeated, "License and registration." This wasn't right. Her instincts, the same instincts that had kept her alive in high-stakes operations, were screaming now. She had followed protocol. She had done everything right. So why did it feel like this was only the beginning of something much worse? Olivia kept her breathing steady, her hand still resting on the wheel. She had dealt with difficult officers before, power-hungry men who saw the badge as a weapon instead of a responsibility, but there was something different about this one, something heavier. The officer, Travis Dean, stood firm outside her window, his fingers still resting near his holster. The flashlight in his other hand remained pointed directly at her face, intrusive and unwavering. "License and registration," he repeated, his tone clipped, almost impatient. Olivia made no sudden movements. "Officer, I need to know why I'm being stopped," she said evenly, keeping her voice calm but firm. Dean didn't answer. His jaw flexed as he chewed his gum, his expression unreadable. The way he stood, rigid, shoulders squared, made it clear he wasn't here for a routine stop. "I'm reaching for my purse," Olivia stated clearly, making sure there was no room for misinterpretation. Still, Dean said nothing. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the passenger seat, retrieving her wallet. She pulled out both her driver's license and her FBI credentials, holding them out for him to see. Dean's eyes flicked over her ID but made no move to take it. The badge should have changed everything. Any officer following protocol would have immediately verified her identity, de-escalated, and let her go. But Dean didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he smirked. "FBI, huh?" Olivia nodded once, That's correct. Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken. Then, instead of asking any follow-up questions or running her license, Dean took a step back. Step out of the vehicle. Olivia blinked. Excuse me? Dean's right hand hovered closer to his gun. His voice remained calm, but there was a quiet threat behind it. Step out. The air between them grew heavier. Olivia knew compliance wasn't always safety. She had read the reports, seen the footage, how quickly situations like this could spiral. She met his gaze, unblinking. On what grounds? For the first time, Dean hesitated. Just a flicker, but it was there. His lips parted like he was about to say something, but then he did something worse. He took a step closer. The flashlight was still aimed at her face, making it difficult to see his expression. His presence was intentional, imposing, invasive. I don't have to explain myself to you, he muttered, voice low. Olivia's fingers tightened slightly around her ID. Then let's call your supervisor and see if he agrees, she said coolly. That set him off. Dean's free hand slammed against the roof of her car, the sharp bang slicing through the quiet night. I said, "Get out." And in that moment, Olivia knew this wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was something else entirely. The sharp crack of Dean's palm against the roof of her car sent a jolt through Olivia's body. Not fear, not yet, but a sharp awareness. This was a test, a calculated power move, and she had seen it before. Olivia tightened her grip on the inside door handle, making sure he couldn't yank it open. Her voice remained steady, but there was an edge to it now. "Officer, step back. You are outside of protocol." Dean didn't move. If anything, his grip on the door handle tightened, his knuckles turning white. His smirk was gone now, replaced with something colder. I said, "Step out." She could hear it now, the quiet frustration creeping into his voice. This wasn't about law enforcement, it was about control, about making sure she obeyed. But Olivia Carter didn't obey bullies. She stayed still, measuring her next words carefully. She needed to de-escalate without showing weakness. "Do you have probable cause to remove me from my vehicle?" Dean's nostrils flared, and for the first time she saw it. A flicker of hesitation, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. He knew he was pushing the line. And then, before he could recover, another set of headlights cut through the darkness. A second patrol car. For the briefest moment, Olivia felt relief. Another officer meant another set of eyes, another voice of reason, maybe even accountability. But then she saw Dean's reaction. He didn't glance back. He didn't acknowledge the arrival of backup. That told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't backup. This was reinforcement. The second patrol car rolled to a stop behind Dean's cruiser. Another officer stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp under the glow of the headlights. No nameplate visible. The man approached, his expression unreadable, but his posture told her enough. He wasn't here to de-escalate. "Problem here?" he asked, his voice low, deliberate. Dean exhaled sharply, finally letting go of Olivia's door handle. His stance relaxed just enough to feign composure. Just dealing with a non-compliant driver. Olivia kept her face neutral, even as her pulse picked up. The second officer, whoever he was, stepped closer, his eyes flicking between Dean and Olivia. "Ma'am," he said, voice deceptively calm. "Step out of the car." Not Director Carter. Not even Miss Carter. Just ma'am. A deliberate move, a stripping of identity. Olivia inhaled slowly, forcing herself to think 3 steps ahead. If she refused, they would escalate. If she complied, she was at their mercy. There was no good choice. The second officer took another step forward, closing the distance. Step out now. And Olivia knew whatever happened next would define everything. The night air was thick, pressing against Olivia's skin as she stepped out of the car. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to stay inside, but she knew the game these men were playing. If she didn't comply, they would escalate. If she did, she was at their mercy. Either way, she wasn't walking away from this untouched. She kept her posture straight, her hands visible, her mind calculating every possible move. Dean took a step forward, using his body to block her from the dashcam's view. The second officer, the one without a nameplate, positioned himself slightly behind her, just close enough to cut off any exit. "You mind turning around for me?" Dean said, his voice carrying that same thinly veiled smugness. Olivia didn't move. "Am I under arrest?" Dean's smirk didn't waver. Suspicious behavior. "That's not a charge. You're refusing to comply. That's not a charge either." Dean let out a low chuckle, shaking his head like she was just another inconvenience. "See, this is the problem with you FBI types. You think you're above the law." Olivia exhaled slowly, keeping her heartbeat steady. "I know the law. I enforce it. And right now, you're breaking it." Dean's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, his breath hot against the night air. "That right?" Olivia didn't back down. "You haven't told me why I'm being detained. You haven't cited a single legal reason for this stop, so let me ask you again. Am I under arrest?" Dean didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her wrist. Too tight, too forceful. Olivia instinctively pulled back, shifting just enough to avoid escalating the situation, but making it clear she wasn't going to be manhandled. Dean's grip tightened. "Don't do that," he warned. The second officer took a step forward, eyes locked on her. "We got a problem here?" Dean's grip didn't loosen. "I think she's resisting." Olivia's stomach turned. She had seen this before, heard it in reports, watched it unfold in surveillance footage. The setup, the narrative twist. She was seconds away from being labeled a threat. The second officer's hand hovered near his radio, his lips parted, ready to say the words that had justified too many escalations before. "We have a non-compliant suspect." And Olivia knew that if he said those words, this night would end differently. Then, before the second officer could speak, something cut through the tension. "Hey, I'm recording this." The voice came from somewhere off to the side, strong, clear. Dean stiffened. The second officer hesitated. And just like that, the balance of power shifted. The moment the words, "I'm recording this," cut through the air, Olivia saw everything shift. Dean's grip on her wrist didn't loosen immediately, but she felt it. The hesitation, the split-second flicker of uncertainty. He knew what this meant. The second officer, the one who had been ready to call her non-compliant, now hesitated too. They weren't untouchable anymore. Olivia turned her head slightly, enough to see the source of the voice without making any sudden movements. A man stood near the edge of the road, phone raised, the glow of the screen casting a faint reflection on his face. He wasn't too close, but he was close enough. Close enough to capture every detail. Close enough to make sure this wasn't just another story swept under the rug. Dean exhaled sharply, his fingers still curled around her wrist, his mind racing for an exit strategy. Olivia had seen this before, the moment when a predator realizes the hunt has been interrupted. The second officer shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't as bold as Dean. He wasn't the one leading this charge. He was following orders, and now, with a witness, he was questioning if he had followed the wrong man. The man with the phone took a cautious step forward. "You sure you want to do this, officer?" His voice was steady, unwavering. Dean finally let go of Olivia's wrist, but he didn't step back. His jaw clenched, nostrils flaring as he turned toward the bystander. "Turn that off!" The man didn't move. Dean took a step forward. "I said..." Before he could finish, another sound filled the air. Sirens. Faint at first, but growing louder. Dean froze. The second officer stiffened, his hand instinctively moving away from his radio. Olivia felt the shift. The tide had turned. The new patrol car skidded to a stop, red and blue lights sweeping across the scene. More officers poured out, hands hovering near their holsters but not drawn. They didn't know what they were walking into yet. Then one of them spotted Olivia. Director Carter. The recognition landed like a gunshot. Dean didn't move. His face was taut, eyes darting between Olivia and the arriving officers. The second officer took an instinctive step back, as if suddenly realizing just how far they had gone. The power dynamic had flipped. Olivia turned, straightening her posture. Her voice was calm, controlled. "I want these officers detained. Now." Dean's jaw clenched harder, his face darkening. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. She wasn't. And for the first time that night, Dean knew this wasn't going to end the way he thought it would. The night was no longer silent. Sirens blared, radios crackled, and orders were shouted as the newly arrived officers took in the scene. Olivia remained still, her pulse steady, but she could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Dean, however, was unraveling. His fingers twitched at his sides, his mind racing through the possible outcomes. His authority had been absolute, until it wasn't. The second officer, standing beside him, looked pale, as if the gravity of the situation had just sunk in. The lieutenant stepped forward, his gaze flicking between Olivia, Dean, and the bystander still holding up his phone. The unspoken question lingered in the air. What the hell happened here? Dean found his voice first. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered, his bravado cracking. "We had reason to believe—" "You pulled a gun on the FBI director," Olivia cut in, her voice razor-sharp. "Do you really want to finish that sentence?" Dean's mouth clamped shut. The lieutenant exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. He knew there was no talking his way out of this. Not with a recording, not with a high-ranking federal official demanding accountability. He turned to the nearest officer. "Cuff them both. Now." Dean flinched. "You've got to be kidding me." The officer moved without hesitation, stepping behind Dean and snapping a pair of handcuffs around his wrists. The second officer didn't resist. He just stared at the ground, a man who had suddenly realized he had backed the wrong horse. For the first time that night, Olivia allowed herself to exhale. It wasn't over. Not yet. The real battle wasn't just about two bad cops. It was about the system that let them believe they could act with impunity. She turned to the bystander. "You still recording?" The man gave her a firm nod, every second. "Good." Olivia's voice was calm, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. She turned back to the lieutenant. "I want full access to both of their disciplinary records, any prior complaints, any reports, and I want internal affairs involved immediately." The lieutenant hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Understood." Olivia watched as Dean was led toward a waiting patrol car, his face twisted with disbelief. He still thought this wouldn't stick, that he'd get out of it, that the system would protect him. But not this time. Not if she had anything to say about it. By morning, the footage had spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story within hours. Social media erupted. The headline was impossible to ignore. FBI Director Olivia Carter held at gunpoint by local police in unlawful traffic stop. The video, crystal clear, undeniable, left no room for spin. Dean's aggression, the second officer's complicity, Olivia's calm defiance, it was all there, playing on repeat across every major platform. By noon, the Justice Department had launched an official investigation. Dean was immediately stripped of his badge. His partner was placed on indefinite suspension. Their department scrambled to issue a statement, but it was the usual scripted damage control. But Olivia knew better. She had spent her career watching these moments, seeing cases gain attention only to be buried under bureaucracy, seeing outrage flicker and fade while the system remained unchanged. Not this time. Sitting in her office, she steepled her fingers, watching the press conference unfold on the TV. A police spokesperson stood at the podium, their tone carefully measured. "We take these allegations very seriously." The same hollow words she had heard before, the same meaningless promises. Then her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated for only a second before answering. "Director Carter." A pause. Then a familiar voice. The bystander who had recorded everything. "I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you did. Most people wouldn't have fought back." Olivia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Most people don't have the power to." Another pause, then quietly, "But you do." She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the weight of that truth settle over her. Justice didn't happen in silence. It happened when people refused to look away. And as long as she had the power, she wasn't looking away either. This story isn't just about one bad cop. It's about a system that allows people like him to thrive. It's about power, accountability, and the undeniable truth that justice only happens when someone refuses to look away. Olivia Carter stood her ground, but how many others never get that chance? How many stories like this go unseen, unheard, and unchallenged? This isn't just a one-time event. It's a reflection of a deeper issue within the system. Change doesn't come from silence. It comes from exposure, from speaking up, from demanding accountability. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Olivia's situation? Do you think police reform is necessary? Why or why not? Share this story if you believe in justice. Let's make sure the world keeps watching. If you found this video powerful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that need to be told. Your voice matters. Let's use it.